Move over, millennials and boomers, because Gen X, they're the ones quietly driving the economy. As a generation, we may have been overlooked most of our lives, but a new study reveals that we're spending $15.2 trillion a year. If Gen X were a country, we would be the second largest consumer market, even bigger than China. But here's the catch. The study itself, it isn't really celebrating us. It's really about how companies can squeeze even more out of us. So in this video today, I want to make sure that you know, as a Gen Xer, how much power you really hold, even if you don't care or you don't want it. Okay, let's start out talking about these invisible power players that we are. So this study that I'm referring to was conducted by Nielsen IQ, NIQ for short, in collaboration with World Data Labs. They called the study the X Factor, how Generation X is fueling trillions of dollars in spending. Now let me read you just a few of the statements that I highlighted from the study, which reveals how they would like to use this data. At NIQ, we continue our mission to decode and predict generational spending patterns worldwide, arming both manufacturers and retailers with the data they need to maximize growth. It continues with, while Gen X won't hit its peak spend until the 2030s, retailers and manufacturers only have a few years to maximize Gen X spend before this cohort's share of total spending starts to decline. We're certain that manufacturers and retailers will see measurable growth if they properly invest in Gen X. Together, we can help your business maximize the Gen X decade. So let's talk about how much we're really spending here. Now the report puts our annual spend at $15.2 trillion a year, and this includes all Gen Xers globally. Now think about that amount. Bigger than the entire country of China's spending, and it's second only to the United States. Now that's the kind of scale that we're talking about here. So much for being the scrappy bunch, right? In the next 5 years, they predict that we will spend $507 billion on food and non-alcoholic beverages, $430 billion on beauty products, and $42 billion on alcohol alone. I mean, golly, Gen Xers, are we still in party mode here? They know exactly where to hit us as well. These categories, they aren't random. They're targeting, our stress, our image, even our coping habits, our addictions. They're going to double down on the things that make us vulnerable as a generation. Now, I will say that some of the food and non-alcoholic category was on wellness and supplements and trying to eat healthy and all of that. So, okay, the study becomes even more revealing. They call us the CFOs, the Chief Financial Officers of not just our own generation, but 3 generations. So they've realized that we're not just the money managers for ourselves, but also for our kids and now for our parents. The study shows that we're still supporting our adult children, and we're being called to step in and manage the finances of our parents as well. The market research sees this as excellent information to capitalize on even further. If we're influencing, our kids or our parents on how to spend their money, that's fine, that's okay. But if we're using our money to actually fund the lives of our parents or kids, then that's another thing completely. and a concerning one at that. It's concerning because only 14% of Gen Xers feel they're ready for retirement. And according to a study done recently by the group Empower, 35% of us cannot afford a $400 expense. 35%. That is more than any other generation surveyed. And yet we are in our highest earning years on average. That's like running 3 companies while your own is going bankrupt. You know, retirement is not like some bonus chapter or jackpot activity. In many instances, it's a necessary one. You know, ignoring our future while carrying everyone else's is reckless. Okay, so let's get back to the spending power that we currently possess. You know, are we holding quiet influence that we've never even acknowledged? You know, this angle, of course, is not mentioned at all in the study. It's only directed at how much power retailers and manufacturers have over us. But power is up for the grabbing. You know, they can only wield their power over us if we allow them to. And of course, they're going to use every advertising and marketing trick that they can. They'll play upon our weaknesses, our distractions, and the things that stress us out, exhaust us, even fear, to get us to buy and spend more. Now, there was an article about this study in USA Today. They were talking to this professor, Mr. Ross Steinem. He's a professor of consumer psychology. I mean, just think about that for a second. You know, he states that these findings should be exciting to Gen Xers because they're finally being heard and recognized and embraced right now. The study doesn't really make me feel embraced. I don't know about you. I don't think it makes us feel heard and recognized either. But if you're a professor of consumer psychology, then of course you would say that, right? You know, and here's the interesting part, I think, is that they predict Gen Xers to continue this upward spending trajectory all the way up until the mid-2030s, where then it starts falling off. And I thought that was kind of coincidental because isn't that around the time that the Social Security cuts are rumored to hit, around 2034, 33, 34. And after our decade is up, we'll be thrown out to pasture and they'll move to the next lucrative demographic. But if I look at this data from our perspective and not theirs, you know, just imagine if all the Gen Xers worldwide stopped consumer spending for 1 week. The ripple effects would be massive. That's the kind of power we don't even realize we have. Now, my final observations on this study is that I didn't really want any more attention as a consumer. I already spend enough. And I've seen what debt and credit cards, what they've done to our generation. You know, they were handing us credit cards as kids. What I want attention on is health care, housing, caregiving support, the things that actually matter for Gen X today and as we age. So yeah, they're paying attention to us, but as consumers, you know, not as people. And that's what I see when I read this study. But what really matters is how we use this knowledge, you know, ourselves. You know, we can choose to keep on being consumers, you know, and being led by our noses, or we can use our influence differently. Or at the very least, just be aware that there's a target on our Gen X backs. They want to get even deeper in our pockets. Just remember that. They're coming for us. So tell me in the comments, what's your take? I will link this study in the description box below so that you can read it for yourselves. You know, and the story doesn't end here. Take a look at this video next. How Gen X Got Seduced into the Rich Lifestyle Trap. I'll link it right here. My fellow Gen Xers, I hope you have a great week. I will see you in the next video in just a few days. Bye.